I'm Kristi Pelzel, Senior International Correspondent for Today News Africa, joined by my co-host, Henry Kohn, Today News Africa's Policy Analyst and Fellow, and our guest, Roel Hoenders, Head of Air Pollution and Energy Efficiency for the International Maritime Organization. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So we've recently learned that the United States will join Saudi Arabia as the only two countries to formally pledge to work towards the IMO's greenhouse gas strategy to achieve zero emissions by 2050. Does having the United States on board speed up efforts for change? And does this indicate a shift in the cooperation between IMO and the US since the Biden administration took office?
It has definitely already created quite a positive momentum, I would say. A declaration by the Biden administration has led to various responses within let's say, the organization. We have seen various responses from stakeholders, from industry, from other member states that are welcoming the statement by the Biden administration. There are several other states, you mentioned a few, but there's several other member states that have already indicated their level of ambition in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions from shipping by 2050. So we are happy to see a longer list of countries that is ambitious in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions from shipping. At the same time, for us as a UN organization representing the interest of all the countries around the world, we are focused and we are working also on ensuring that the interest of other countries, particularly of developing countries that are far from their main export markets, including in Africa, but also some of the very small island developing states that are largely dependent on maritime transport, will not be faced with relatively high transport costs that may have an impact, a negative impact on their competitiveness.
So building off of what you're saying, especially putting developing countries potentially at a disadvantage, I'd like just, if you could go a little bit more into depth in terms of the technical cooperation projects that you or the IMO is working on, especially with developing countries.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we see is that in terms of reducing, having, well, as the US mentioned in the declaration, working towards zero carbon emissions from maritime transport, we need to facilitate a shift in the current use of heavy fuel oils, fossil fuel oils, towards alternative fuels. And those alternative fuels are most likely hydrogen, ammonia, biofuels, and what we see today is that the price difference between fossil fuels and these low carbon fuels are enormous. And so we need to put in place a system that allows for that price difference to be matched or to be bridged. What we do at the same time is to make sure that developing countries, as I mentioned before, will not be negatively affected actually by that price increase when it comes to their imports. So what we're trying to do by means of our technical cooperation projects is to look into what are technology solutions that can be offered, that can be shared with developing countries. How can we ensure that the administrations are adequately participating in our meetings, in the decision-making process? And also we're increasingly working with other organizations, other UN entities, but also with banks, the international development banks, but also with commercial banks, to really map out what are the current barriers for developing countries when it comes to port investments, when it comes to ship upgrades, or even what are the necessary improvements along the maritime value chain, so the logistic chains in the country that can help them to be cost effective and to make sure that they're part of kind of the transition to low carbon fuels.
So it seems like cost is and access to financing is certainly a barrier for a lot of countries, or it is a major barrier. But Special Envoy for Climate John Kerry has also said that the technologies to decrease emissions are already available. So I'm wondering then, are there other either other technologies that need to be developed, or what are some other obstacles to their global implementation?
Yeah, technology there certainly are technologies available in certain parts of the world which have large kind of maritime technology hubs and centers. And what we're doing as well is as part of our technical cooperation to have a cooperation on technology. We have set up a so-called maritime technology transfer cooperation centers around the world, so-called MTCCs. And we have set up these MTCCs in Africa, one in the Pacific, one in the Caribbean, and one in Southeast Asia, particularly with the aim of facilitating cooperation on technology. So to make sure that the administrations, but also the private sector in developing countries, such as in Africa, the center that we have in Africa is based in Mombasa, in Kenya, allows for local companies, local administrations to be aware of these very rapid moving technology developments and think about what can be done in terms of ship construction. There are many things that can be done to improve the efficiency of a ship during its construction phase, but also in its operation. So these are practices and technologies that we like to share through these MTCCs around the world.
So the goal of zero emissions by 2050 has been set, but I'm wondering if the commitment of a few countries is great enough to reach the goal without global buy-in. It seems like some countries aren't quite ready to make that shift, and they're very economic, full speed ahead focused over making changes in investment and environment. So I'm wondering if a few strong countries is enough to meet that goal.
It will definitely set the right path, but our intention and shipping as a global industry needs a global regulatory framework. And in order to achieve that, we need to make sure that all countries are part of the solution. So we don't want to single out certain countries simply because they're not ambitious enough today. We need to ensure that they are becoming part of the solution. We need to think about why are they not willing to buy in yet, and what is needed in order to make them buy in. And I think every country has its right to be concerned about its economic competitiveness, needs to be concerned about the imports. We mentioned some of the small island developing states that are completely dependent on imports through shipping. And if those prices, because of low carbon fuels, will go up by 50% or 100%, that may have a huge impact on their economies. And that's why they may not be today as, let's say, ambitious as some other countries. So we need to look at the overall picture to make sure that we don't end up with a patchwork of regulations around the world that only favor economic developed countries and would leave out certain developing countries, because that would be a short-term gain, but not work in the long term.
Thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure.
We have learned a lot.